Hello, thank you again to see you and to watch you on eprium.com. I'm really happy to have with me Professor Maxime Dougados to discuss the missing data handling, how we could prevent them and how we could handle them in the protocol and in the publication process. Professor Dougados, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Etienne, and I think that you are correct. This section, that is the question of the missing data, is very important because it's frequently forgotten, usually in the publication, and I am afraid also by some investigators. This is the agenda of my presentation. And first of all, I would like to start with the categories. What I call the categories. In fact, there are two kinds of missing data. The one we can observe in the cross-sectional study, that is one shot. An example here, you see a study with 10 patients and in which we have collected the gender of the patient. And you see that for the patient 4 and patient number 9, we do not have the information concerning the gender. That's a missing data in a cross-sectional study. There are also other categories concerning the longitudinal study, that is the studies in which you are collecting the same information several times during the study. Here you see in black, that's a patient for who you have all the data available at each visit in black. In blue, there is one intermediate value which is missing, and in red, the final value which is missing. And the question will be how to handle that, how to do with this, the analysis, because you need this information in order to perform adequately your analysis. But before how to handle, I would like to emphasize the most important, at least in my view, concerning the missing data, is not how to handle, how to analyze the missing data, but how to prevent. And in order to understand why the prevention is important, it's very simple. What do we mean by missing data handling? In fact, what we are doing, that we are making an information that does not exist. And making information that does not exist is cheating. And cheating in clinical research is prohibited. It's clear. So I don't know how to handle without cheating. So the best way to do is to prevent. So how to prevent missing data? Personally, based on my experience, I think that a simple way to do, first, you ask the person in charge of the writing of the protocol, in the statistic analysis section, you ask him or her to add a subsection entitled missing data handling. And as soon as this person will understand what does it mean, he will write another subsection, missing data prevention. So how, in this particular study, you anticipate that you will prevent missing data. And sometimes it's difficult because that's not methodology, that's a daily practice in clinical research. So I give you an example in the DESIR cohort, which is a French cohort on spondyloarthritis. Just to mention, we have 3 full-time clinical CRA, clinical research assistant. We are a lot of contact with the investigator and the patient. However, here, if there is one item which is important, at least for me, based on my experience, is this one, the active participation of the principal investigator in the monitoring, not only in the writing of the protocol, not only in the submission of the protocol to the health authorities in order to get the financial support, not only to look at the statistical analysis result and write, but in between, that is, you get your financial support to run your study, and you do not, until you perform the statistical analysis, that's the monitoring. And you need to have a very close collaboration with the patient, the investigators, and the clinical research unit. Otherwise, you are in trouble. If you fail, and you will fail, in other words, whatever the effort, you will have some missing data. And then you will have to, what we call the handling of missing data, but in fact, it's how to analyze the data when in the database you have missing data. So for the cross-sectional study, So either you do nothing, that is called complete analysis. That is, if the example I gave you a few slides ago, it was the gender, you have the sex of the patient in only 8 of the 10. If you have 5 males and 3 females, but you calculate the percentage of males in these 8 patients and not in the 10. But you say, it should be better if I should consider the 10 patients and not the 8. So in this case, you can take the median of the group, you can take, you do what you want. But currently, I would say that the sophisticated technique is the multiple imputation. What does it mean, multiple imputation? In fact, when in a database, you have collected not only the information of the missing data, as the example of the gender, but you have also other information. And here I give you again the example in spondyloarthritis, where you have a part for the gender, you have the information concerning the age of the patient, the B27, the uveitis, CRP, and BASDAI. And then there is a technique using a very easy of the software, which is called multiple imputation. That is, considering all the other information I have for this patient, but also for the other patients, I can estimate the missing value. That is what we call multiple imputation. So I will give you an example. Imagine that for the gender, you have 8 missing data. So you have the information, only 2 patients. That is on the left part of this slide. And then you use your software, you apply a multiple imputation, and you see that you have a result. You see that the software is giving you a result. That is, now you have an information on the 10 patients. So you are very happy for that. But this is a real example. But if you remember correctly, on the left, you have the true data. And here, with this missing data, you have the after imputation material. And here, you see that in 4 out of the 10 patients, the gender switch from male to female or female to male. So when you will present this kind of information to clinicians, I assume they will be quite reluctant. But that is the correct way today to evaluate the missing data in a cross-sectional study. The question will be whether or not there is a threshold of missing data, a percentage of missing data above which we should refrain to perform a multiple imputation. There is no rule for that. My personal rule is 20%. If you have more than 20%, it's too hazardous. So now in the longitudinal study, there are plenty of techniques, You can do not what you want. I would like to emphasize something, that the statistician is not the appropriate person or the optimal person to take the decision of the rule of the missing data handling in longitudinal study. I give you this example. Now, of course, the statistician is well aware of the BOCF, that is baseline observation carried forward, LOCF, last observation carried forward, but there are plenty of other techniques. In fact, it depends on the objective. Example, if you have to evaluate a painkiller in osteoarthritis, so you know in advance that usually there is a placebo effect, there is an improvement in pain. But you say, oh, if I want to be sure that I will not to be close to the reality, I will take the worst scenario. And here, usually the worst scenario is a BOCF. That is, for a patient with a missing value, you give the baseline. That's an example. Just to emphasize the fact that the choice of the technique should be within the hands of the clinician and not the statistician. And concerning the final visit, it's the same, but the spirit is the same. Whether or not you will use a LOCF, BOCF, worst scenario, that is the worst value you have observed in the group of the patient, or the best scenario, the best value you have observed in this group of patients. But that should be the decision of the clinician. But I have also to recognize that nowadays there is another technique called generalized estimated equation. you will see plenty of publication nowadays, the GEE technique. In fact, it's like a modelization. So you can, the software is calculating and estimating a value based on the change over time, not only for the patient, but also for the characteristic or the other characteristic of this patient, and also the other characteristic of the group of patients. And that is usually what is used in this kind of studies. Concerning the publication, I am afraid that I am reviewing a lot of articles, and I am afraid that there is something which is missing. And usually, in particular for the clinical trials, the longitudinal studies, the cohort, the registry, I know what is the reality. So usually I am asking the submitting person to add a section in the statistical analysis, missing data handling. What was their method in order to handle with this missing data? And then I am writing here, is there a threshold above which any imputation is too hazardous? My personal interpretation, it's a personal interpretation, is 20%. As soon as you see multiple imputation where there was more than 20% of missing data, you can be very critical. And even worse, have you defined a threshold of missing data above which you will not publish your data because there are too many missing data? I gave you an example for the French rheumatology, which was a publication of the effect of abatacept on the DAS28 in daily practice in different centers in France. There is a publication. It has been published, so you can see the result. I think it's even in a good journal, so that's JAMA as an example. But if you look carefully in which percentage of patients it was possible to calculate the change in the DAS, that is, you have the DAS at baseline and the DAS, not only the DAS, but only the DAS28 ESR, not CRP, you find that it is roughly 50% missing data. So do you trust data for which either you see only the completers or you see a GEE technique when you have 50% of missing? That's questionable. So that's my conclusion, that please make a lot of efforts in order to try to prevent the missing data. I gave you some clues here, some tips, but the most important, again, is the implication of the principal investigator in the monitoring of the study. Never forget that missing data handling is hazardous, whatever is the technique. Currently, the best, or the technique permitting you to publish would be multiple imputation for the cross-sectional, missing data for the cross-sectional study, and GEE for the longitudinal one. Thank you.
Thank you a lot for your presentation, and I hope that we could invite you again for another talk about the clinical methodology in our fields as a rheumatologist or clinician in general. Thank you, Prof. Dougados.
It will be a pleasure.
Thank you.